Washington Journal continues.
And we're back with Congressman Tom Cole, Republican of Oklahoma. Congressman, here's the Washington Post. The GOP payroll tax plan is set for a vote today. How do you plan to vote?
Well, I'll vote for it.
Why is that?
Well, I think it's a good plan. Look, it actually does what the president wanted us to do. It extends the payroll tax deduction for a year. It actually takes care of the doc fix as well for 2 years, which is good. And it extends, but at the same time reforms the unemployment extension. And it's all paid for, but it's paid for, that's where we disagree, obviously, with the president, with spending cuts spread out over several years as opposed to a tax increase. So, look, I think it actually represents a pretty reasonable compromise, and it's a product that can move. I mean, so far we've been watching the Senate. They've been unable to move any kind of plan. We think it's important just to sort of get some momentum going, to get actually something through a chamber. And hopefully the Senate can do something. Then we'll sit down in conference and see where we go from there.
On this issue of how to pay for an extension of the payroll tax holiday, Senator Dick Durbin, the number 2 in the Senate, came to the floor yesterday. Here's what he had to say.
Should we ask the wealthiest in America to pay a little more in taxes so that we can provide a payroll tax cut for almost 160 million Americans? That's it. What we hear from the other side of the aisle over and over again is no. You cannot impose a new burden on the wealthiest in America. You cannot ask any more sacrifice from people who are already earning at least $1 million a year.
Congressman?
Well, you begin to wonder how many times the Democrats want to use this particular tax increase. They were going to use it for the jobs program. They tell us it's going to run out within a year because the president's not going to renew taxes for anybody making above $200,000 a year, should he be reelected, or frankly, even if he's not, he'll still be president of the United States. So they keep using this same thing. We think it's by far more important to look at spending cuts. We think we don't have a revenue problem nearly as much as we have a spending problem. But regardless of our disagreement on that, isn't the important thing about extending the payroll tax, extending the doc fix, making sure that we can continue unemployment benefits in areas we need them? We think that that's the important thing. We've laid a plan on the table. We will pass that plan today. It's nice to hear what Senator Durbin has to say, but until he can actually move a bill through a chamber his party controls, it's kind of meaningless. I think they ought to sit down and work with us instead of throw stones at us.
Senate Democratic leadership, though, has said the House GOP bill won't even get a vote on the floor of the Senate because it includes this language to approve the Keystone Pipeline.
Well, that's up to them, but, I think that's very short-sighted. Look, the Keystone Pipeline's popular. We all know it was postponed largely for political reasons by the White House till after the election. It's been sort of a wink-wink, nod-nod. Once we get past the election, we'll approve it. We don't think we ought to be waiting on something like that. Plus, we'll have a provision in the legislation that would allow the president, if he thought there was a national security issue, to actually veto it up to 60 days after the passage of the bill. So if they really want to do it, they could still agree to our bill, and the president could still stop the construction of the pipeline. I actually thought that's a very generous concession on our part, but I think politically the White House is worried, well, then that looks like we're vetoing American jobs, and that's precisely the point. They would be.
On the payroll tax holiday extension, the Republican Party has appeared divided on this issue of whether or not even to extend it into 2012, some questioning whether or not it has worked the first time around.
I think there is a genuine debate inside the Republican Party over this. And frankly, I would say without any hesitation, I have some trepidation about this myself, because when you suspend payroll taxes, at some point you always need to reinstate them, because we do have to fund the Social Security system. The difference on this one, and I think the reason why it's got such broad Republican support, is that the Speaker put together a package that pays for this extension. But I think we all agree that this was probably the last time. But, again, the economy is still struggling. There's a strong case to be made for it. Somewhere around $120 to $140 billion worth of purchasing power for the economy. Let's work together, get this passed, get it paid for, and then see where we are next year.
And it's paid for. Does that mean the money goes back into the Social Security Trust Fund?
It absolutely does. Our conference was very insistent upon that.
And it extends it. Does it keep it at the current level of 4.2%?
Keeps it at the current level. It does not go as far as the president might have liked in his original proposal. Does not get employers any kind of special break. It sort of keeps the status quo in place for another year.
What do you think? What's your prediction on the vote today?
Well, I think, look, I'm a whip. Anything north of 218, I'm happy with. In fact, 218 some days I'm real happy with. Look, I think we'll have a very strong Republican majority. We'll pick up some Democratic votes. So my colleague from Oklahoma, Dan Bourne, came out yesterday. I think there'll be others. So I would expect us to be, past this comfortably, someplace in the 230s probably.
How many Republican votes do you think you might lose?
I don't know. I think there are some members struggling with it, honestly, for the best of reasons, again, because they're concerned about the deficit. But I don't think it's going to be enough to keep us from 218. There was an awful lot of enthusiasm for the package that was put forward. And the Keystone Pipeline is a very important part of that. A lot of our people believe very strongly in energy independence, plus this is a source of jobs at a time when we need jobs, and this is a reliable foreign supplier. Canada's one of our best friends, and frankly not an environmentally insensitive country itself. So we think if you actually look at the package, it's got a lot to appeal to, and it'll attract some Democratic votes. We think in the Senate, if Senator Reid would put it on the floor, we'll have Democratic votes in support of this package, plus a unified Republican conference as well.
You are a whip. You know where the votes are. If the Senate, if the Senate were to come back to the House and say, we will give you a package that just doesn't include the Keystone language, but will include the payroll tax cut extension that's paid for by spending cuts, things that Republicans like, but it excludes that Keystone pipeline language, would you have the votes to pass that?
Not without Democratic help. Once you start taking a package apart and taking out the elements that actually drew your majority together, then you start losing votes. And so if the Democrats want to tamper with the package, saying you can't get it through the Senate, they would have to provide votes in the House as well. I think beyond that, though, again, this is a majority in the Senate that just doesn't seem to get much done. It's been 1,000 days, roughly. They haven't written a budget. We've got 26 bills stacked up over there like cordwood. None of it's moving. House has actually done a lot of things. You can agree or disagree with it. Ryan budget, the repeal of Obamacare, but the reality is the Senate just doesn't seem to work very well under its current leadership.
Let's get to phone calls. Tamara is a Democrat in Brooksville, Florida. Go ahead, Tamara.
Yes, I have somewhat of a question and also a statement. And it is as we are looking at the economy, people are losing their homes. And literally, we're talking children being homeless and without food. It is more profitable to allow the 1% of America to continue to feed their boats, their mansions, and yet we don't have a heart for people who are just fighting for the basic necessities.
Congressman?
Well, actually, first of all, I think your caller states it very well. This is a tough time for the country. There's no doubt about it. A lot of people are in tough circumstances. On the other hand, we think the answer to that is actually economic growth. What are the things that can stimulate growth, create jobs, create wealth, put people back to work, let people keep their homes? Things like the Keystone Pipeline are one of those things. Things like letting people keep more money in their pockets, spend, keep the economy moving, are one of those things. So, again, I think both sides actually understand we've got a serious problem. We obviously have differences as how you approach it. What we're offering, we think, today is a reasonable compromise, something that achieves the president's objectives, gives him some victories, some things he can be pleased with, at the same time is consistent with our principles. So we hope we can get this passed. We hope it'll put people to work.
Walter, a Republican in Columbia, South Carolina.
Yeah, I got a question. What are they going to do for the unemployed? Because I'm actually unemployed in South Carolina. I had worked with a company and had depression, still have depression, was discriminated against. What are they going to do? Actually, I think they need to revamp the tax systems and look at the tax systems in each state and try and do a restructuring and put harder tariffs.
Walter, before the congressman answers, how long have you been on unemployment?
I've gone through my fourth tier and was denied benefits, which should not have been denied.
All right. Congressman, what will happen to Walter?
Well, obviously, I don't know the details of his individual case. The bill we're talking about will extend unemployment benefits again. We've done that several times, actually on a bipartisan basis. Difference is this time we're actually paying for it.
But it's not extended for 99 weeks. How long is it extended for?
59.
59.
And, but there's also variations within that depending on the unemployment rate. We're going to try and give the states a little bit more flexibility in applying the rules, where if they want to use drug tests or they want to use things like we want you working for a high school degree while you're doing it, they can do that. That'd be their call. So I think Dave Camp, the chairman of Ways and Means, has put together a pretty sound package. We all know this is a program that needs to be changed. I think he's going to do it. But the key thing, to your caller's point, is just putting people back to work, creating job opportunities. And we think the way to do that is, again, things like Keystone, things like, trying to keep taxes low and purchasing power as plentiful as we possibly can. We're working to try and do that. Again, we've passed 26 bills this year that we think would do that. We've worked with the president on some of those things, by the way, the free trade agreements, and we both sides believe will create jobs for America.
On this issue of purchasing power, the New York Times editorial says this about your efforts to reform and cut the unemployment benefits. The Republican plan will cut $11 billion of that, of the $45 billion, in 2012 by slashing up to 40 weeks from the program, reducing by more than half the maximum 73 weeks now available. Because of the way the program is structured, the biggest cuts would come in the states with the highest unemployment. Millions of jobless workers would be quickly left without subsistence, and the weak economy would be weakened further by the drop in consumer spending.
Well, we disagree, obviously. Not a surprise. Republicans in the New York Times editorial page have a different point of view. Look, we also think that this has been stretched out so long, it's actually kept some people out of the workforce. It's become a discouragement for people to seek and to move toward other opportunities. In the end, it needs to be reformed. But I suspect that's something we can sit down with our friends on the other side of the aisle and talk about. At the end of the day, we'd just like to see some proposal from them that they can actually pass in the chamber that they control.
Joe, Democratic caller in Oklahoma.
Congressman, this is Joe Brawley from Ada, Oklahoma.
Hey, Joe.
We've known each other a number of years.
Hey, good to talk to you.
Well, it was good that I found you on here this morning. We've known each other many years. We've worked together on a number of projects, and we do have a lot of philosophical differences. And I thank you for your service, but I have to tell you that I just cannot get past this bundling of everything that comes on. I've got a solution to the situation. I'm going to transport all 536 congressmen and President Obama down to Guantanamo. I'm going to leave you there and let you sleep on cots. I'm going to let you eat MREs, and when you make 2 or 3 decisions, then we'll come back for a vacation.
Congressman.
Well, I think to be fair, you ought to include Vice President Biden in the trip as well. I don't think he escaped. Look, I understand that point of view as if we've gotten nothing done this year. The reality is it's really not the case. To be fair to the President and the Republicans and Democrats last December, a year ago, made a huge compromise on the extension of the Bush tax cuts and on the extension of unemployment and on the payroll tax. Fast forward to April, we reduced, domestic discretionary spending at less than Republicans wanted, more than Democrats wanted, but a compromise. Go forward to the much maligned debt ceiling debate. It actually lowers long-term debt, but we didn't default on America's obligation. We gave the president what he wanted. Again, a big compromise. I think we're here in that situation again. And then if you look at things like, again, the free trade agreements, the bipartisan vote we had just less than a month ago on veterans hiring preferences and tax credits, the elimination of 3% withholding on federal contracts, something that the president and the Republicans agreed on. There's actually been a little bit more going on up here than one thinks. I think the problem from the country standpoint, it always seems to be the last minute. There's always a lot of drama associated with it. People have enough drama in their own lives right now. They don't need more drama here. So, again, I understand the frustration, but that's part of the turmoil of democracy and part of the challenge you have in divided government. The American people sort of gave us a split decision in the last election, and it is difficult when you've got a Republican House, Democratic Senate, Democratic President.
Brandon, an independent in Dover, Delaware. You're next.
Yes, how you doing this morning?
Morning.
Very good.
I love C-SPAN, but I have a couple issues that I would like to talk about real quick. You have people coming out of jails, you have people coming out of college, and you have people coming back from overseas. You have all these 3 groups that's looking for jobs, but yet, and I'm not saying it's wrong, you give tax cuts to companies that hire people from armed forces. So that's putting the other 2 below. Then, in these small areas, I just left Mooresville, North Carolina. In these small areas, you don't have any buses. So how can these people get to jobs because they don't have any buses? Okay, then you have corporations, McDonald's, these big corporations. They should not be paying anybody under $10 an hour. Okay, and I'm working to be a millionaire, so I kind of agree that once I become a millionaire, and I'm working hard, that I don't want, people in my pocket, because I'm the one that's doing this work, and I do commend people that work hard, to earn money if they do it legally. And I called the other day, my last point, I called the other day, and they said that these small corner stores do not have to report their income. Well, do you actually know how many jeans, how many shoes, how many white tees they sell? These little small corner, Chinese stores. And
all right,
stuff.
Brandon, we're going to leave it there. Congressman, what did you hear from the caller?
Well, quite a few points and good ones, too. On the veterans question, look, I think there's actually a bipartisan, honestly, a national consensus that people sacrifice, because this is an all-volunteer military, put themselves in harm's way to defend us, that when they come home, they deserve a little bit of an extra break. And again, there was broad agreement on that. The president feels that way. The Republicans, the Democrats in Congress feel that way. So I think that's a good thing, not a bad thing. I think most Americans would support that. On your question about buses, that's generally a local matter. I know in my area we have a kind of robust rural transit system, but again, it's tough when you don't have a big urban population to actually sustain these things economically, and particularly quite often the population using them don't have a lot of money to sustain them with. So it is difficult. In terms of corporations, look, I think free markets generate wealth, and this country has been incredibly prosperous and incredibly successful. Even at a difficult time like this, Americans live better than almost anybody else in the world, still have more opportunity than most people in the world. So I don't think actually punishing people that are putting people to work is generally a good idea. Last point, I hope you make it on being a millionaire. I think that's the quintessential American dream. And one of the things that's been interesting to me in the course of the debates, because I do think the president has spent a little time trying to divide Americans for political purposes. High-income people are very blessed and very fortunate. But by the way, they do also pay disproportionately high taxes compared to other groups. I don't have a big problem with that. I think that's a very legitimate thing. But the idea that somehow people that make money don't pay a lot of money in taxes, that's just simply not true. The average, quote, millionaire pays about 25% of their income to the federal government. That doesn't include state taxes, other charges. So, we can argue about what the rate is. As a matter of fact, it would be interesting if the president would actually lay out a number that he thought the appropriate number was. I think most people would be shocked about how much people that actually earn money make. You got a different set of questions on capital gains, different set of questions on dividends, but those are all coming to a head next year.
A number of our viewers follow us on Twitter. Twitter.com, C-SPAN WJ is the handle. Here's one from Cindy, and she says, ask him how he feels about working through his Christmas vacation.
Look, if that's what it takes to get the job done, then I'm certainly more than prepared to do it. I also think about the other people that end up working when Congress is working. You'll be here. But there's a lot of people, obviously, who work very hard. The staff, the security, that this interferes with their Christmas. But look, at the end of the day, we just need to get the job done. That's what we're trying to do. We're going to move important legislation that we think is a step in the right direction today. We've actually worked pretty well with our Democratic friends in the Senate on the appropriations process. I was talking to Chairman Hal Rogers, the House Appropriations Committee, last night. We basically have a bill, I think, broadly done. There's some hesitation, I think, right now in the Senate to move it. They want to have leverage on the payroll tax. That's silly. We should get the appropriations for next year finished. There would be then no risk of a government shutdown at all.
And just to be clear, for those that aren't in Washington, we're talking about the 9 spending bills that haven't been approved for 9 federal agencies to keep them running.
Absolutely. And
for
we want to
next
get that
year.
Done. Sure. And again, we set the limit on how much we're going to spend this summer. It's actually part of the debt ceiling negotiation in the Budget Control Act. We've lived within that. We've worked hard with our Democratic friends that have differences of opinion. Again, that's something we could wrap up. And I actually think it would help to get that done relatively quickly, provide a basis to go ahead and solve the rest of the problem.
So there are the votes on the Republican side in the House to pass some sort of omnibus package.
I actually think it'll be a bipartisan vote. When we pass the minibus, the 3 appropriations bills that have already been passed, We had 134, 135 Republicans, 160 Democrats. It was actually a big bipartisan vote. I would anticipate, maybe not those numbers or ratios, but I would anticipate, because this has been a negotiated settlement between the two sides, that there'll be a lot of votes from both sides. So that's going to be, I think, a major success. We're actually moving back toward restoring what's called regular order around here and moving things as we should.
So what's your prediction then? Are you here past this week?
You know, I really think that depends on people way above my pay grade at the Speaker and Majority Leader level. I would not be surprised if we are. And that's unfortunate. I think we could wrap things up. But, look, the Senate moves more slowly than we do. I understand that. They're not a majoritarian institution. We can get our work done in the House by Friday. No question about it. The real question is, can they get their work done in the Senate? I'll leave them to answer that.
So your flight is scheduled for?
I have my last flight scheduled for the 23rd, in a desperate hope that I'll be home for Christmas.
Bob, a Republican in Greenville, South Carolina. You're next.
Hey, good morning. When George Bush left office, the federal government was spending $3.5 trillion a year. Now, 3 years later, the government budget is stuck at $4.6 trillion a year. Where's this extra trill going? I know $100 billion is probably going for the war. But where's the rest going? Is it going to bail out Democratic states like New York, California, or is it going to union buddies? Where exactly, now that the stimulus is gone and we've spent $700 billion there, where is the rest of this money going? Every year we're suddenly committed to spending another $1 trillion more a year. Can you please tell the viewers and me where this money is now deadlocked to go, and how come it's sacrosanct and can't be cut at all?
Well, first of all, it is being cut, but it's not being cut nearly enough or nearly rapidly enough. And I think that would change if we have a Republican Senate, Republican President. Obviously, I think that would move a lot differently. But, we may be a majority in the House. We're still a minority in the legislative process, if you think of it as the three-part process. I'm not sure I agree with your numbers on 4.6. I think spending's still about $3.7 trillion. But you're absolutely right about the size of the deficit. It's about $1.3 to $1.4 trillion. It's not come down nearly as rapidly as it should for a couple of reasons. First, in terms of the spending, the Obama administration ramped up discretionary spending in 2009, 2010. It wasn't just the stimulus. Almost every part of government went up. Bringing that down is tough because at the end of the day we end up compromising with the Senate, and you've got to move legislation through there. That's a problem. Obviously, the president doesn't have to sign a bill just because you pass it. He can veto it if he wants to. And if people think, well, gosh, surely nobody would veto a bill because it didn't spend enough money, they've forgotten the Clinton years. Bill Clinton used to do that on a pretty regular basis and was very successful at that politically. So, what you're going to need to really bring down the spending is long-term structural entitlement reform. That's what the Ryan budget represented, and that's what it's going to take over the long haul. Discretionary spending has actually come down the last two years. That's the money spent for defense and roads and education, what have you. But the big drivers are Medicare, Medicaid, entitlement benefits of all sorts, Social Security to a lesser extent because it's now drawing from the general fund, but it still has, terrific reserves on its own, so it's not in any kind of immediate danger. But we don't tackle those problems in a serious way. The Ryan budget was a serious attempt to do that. Then we're going to have big deficits for a long time that aren't sustainable.
Andy in Chicago has this email for you, Congressman. I agree with you that any tax cut extension should be paid for. Could you refresh my memory, please? How was the extension for tax cuts for the rich, job creators, been paid for?
Well, actually, for the current tax cut, remember, the president asked for. President Obama could have let every single Bush tax cut run out. And by the way, he's already accepted in principle 80% of those cuts, which go to about 95% of the American people. On the last portion, again, he made the decision last December, about a year ago, I'm going to let these run another 2 years, and then at that point, I'm probably not going to do it again. He's very clear in that. That's one of the reasons why, by the way, it's very difficult when you make a deal for 2 years and all of a sudden, well, we want to change it. We want to use this now. We want to go ahead and raise taxes for my jobs program or raise taxes for the payroll tax extension. The president sort of made a deal and is reneging on it, quite frankly, from a Republican standpoint. And I think you need to allow investors to have certainty. In terms of job growth, if you actually look at the period between when the tax cuts really began in 2003, there was quite a bit of job growth. And we were coming out of both the recession that began in 2001, compounded by 9/11, which was a real disaster to the economy. Those things, we managed to get through it. Then we had a financial crisis that, quite honestly, nobody saw coming, and I think both parties, regulators, and private industry all have a lot to answer for in the long term.
Scott, Democrat in Maine, you're up next.
Yeah, thank you for taking my call. I wanted to ask him pretty much, I got two things really, about the entitlement cuts that they keep trying to get a hold of. Why isn't anybody talking about taking away their federal retirement thing and kind of blending that in with Social Security and Medicare? I mean, they got like a super deal, private deal going with the Senate and the Congress. And second of all, that pipeline y'all trying to throw in, I've worked pipelines, and by the time that pipeline gets to a state border, another company's going to pick up. So the people who are digging that pipeline in one state are going to be unemployed in 3 months.
Congressman?
Well, first of all, look, there are both temporary and permanent jobs. That's true with any construction project. That'd be like saying, gosh, when we finish that bridge, those people are unemployed. The reality is quite often they move on to another job. But anything that creates work and wealth, I think, is a good thing. Anything that enhances the energy security of the country is a good thing. And this is a project we ought to do. Look, I'm from Oklahoma. We have a lot of pipeline in Oklahoma. We don't think this is unusual. And we're able to do it without environmental damage. There are literally billions of dollars worth of pipeline across the Middle West. This is not unusual. This is, we ought to go ahead and do the work. The real debate here, I think, is really not about the pipeline itself. It's really about the longer-term debate over global warming. Legitimate debate. But we're going to be using carbon-based energy, honestly, as long as anybody that's viewing this program is alive. And this is going to be developed energy. It's either going to come south to America, or the Canadians will build their own pipeline to the west. It'll go to Vancouver, and it'll be shipped to China. I just think it's a tragedy not to use a resource that's available from a willing buyer that will create jobs. He had a second question, and I've forgotten. I should have written that down.
Well, if you think of it, we'll come back to it.
I apologize.
That's all right. Let me give you Tony on Twitter, who says, did you sign Grover Norquist's tax pledge, and are taxes at the lowest level they've been since the 1950s?
I did, and taxes are not at the lowest level they've been, but income is, partly because the economy is not growing rapidly. There was a time when the top rate was actually lower than it is today. It was during the Reagan boom years in the 80s, but it got raised during the 80s because, again, we had a shortfall. So the rates aren't as low, but until you can get the economy moving again, and I don't know any economist that thinks raising taxes in a down economy is a good idea. Again, I just invite people to remember that was a President Obama decision. He could have literally raised tax rates on every American, and after the last elections, remember, still Democratic majorities until January. They could have passed him a bill that would have said, look, we want taxes to go up on people that are raising over $200,000 a year. We wouldn't have been able to repeal that as Republicans. At least we couldn't have ever gotten it past the presidential veto. So I think you're disingenuous to argue in December, literally a year ago, we need to extend these tax cuts for the economy. That's President Obama's argument. And in addition, I want a payroll tax cut, and I want an extension of unemployment. You get that deal, and here we are a year later on what's supposed to be a 2-year deal, and the president spent really the last 6 months trying to get out of the deal that he made himself.
Congressman Tom Coles, our guest, Republican of Oklahoma, serving his 5th term, represents the 4th District, serves on the Appropriations and Budget Committee. He's also a deputy whip for the Republican Conference and a member of the Republican Steering Committee. Shirley, a Republican in Abilene, Texas. Good morning.
Yes, hello. There are two really big problems in this country right now, and anybody as old as I am, and I'm old, knows that for the last 30 years, we have gone into this international trade, and I would love to hear the Republicans say, we are going to revisit every trade agreement, and if it's not beneficial to us, we're out of it. We just ratified the treaty with Colombia, which is a failed state. It's still giving us drugs and thugs, and all of these need to be revisited at once and changed to where it's fair.
Congressman?
Well, first of all, I'm going to disagree with the caller on Colombia. I've been to Colombia recently, actually. It's been one of the great success stories, bipartisan success stories in the hemisphere. It's one of the few places, by the way, where Americans are genuinely popular. And it's one of the places that we run a trade surplus with. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of domestic opposition in Colombia, as there was in Korea, by the way, to these agreements because they thought they were too favorable to the United States. It was quite a heavy lift, particularly in South Korea, for the government to actually get it through. So this idea that we always lose in trade agreements, that somehow our people are incompetent and their people are super competent, I frankly find questionable. These are good agreements. All the economists tell us it's going to create 250,000 jobs or up to 250,000 jobs. We ought to be doing that. The other thing that I think we ought to think about when we talk about the drug trade is who's the market, and that's us. I spent a lot of time in Colombia, Guatemala, Panama, Mexico, looking at some of the problems those countries have dealing with drug cartels. They're not selling those drugs to their own people. We ought to look in the mirror a little bit and understand. I actually had a wonderful discussion with President Calderon in Mexico, and he made the point to not just me, but a group of American members of Congress. He said, I would always be against this, but why don't you legalize drugs in the United States? Because you're killing us down here. That's something that I don't support, but something from our standpoint, we ought to take some joint responsibility here. We've worked well with the Colombians. They've made a lot of progress. Believe me, if you go to Bogota or Medellin, this is not clear and present danger anymore. And they've done it at considerable sacrifice and cost to themselves. A lot of lives, a lot of effort, but in partnership with the United States. So we live in a global economy, and the idea that we're going to be prosperous when 95% of the globe's consumers are outside our borders, I think is a mistake. If anything, we were very slow in getting into the global economy. The countries that have done that have traded, look, Japan's not a third world country, and life's pretty good there. They run a big surplus. Germany's not a third world country. It runs big surpluses. We need to be in those markets. We need to be competitive.
We have about 10 minutes left here with you, sir. Tom's next. He's an independent in Dayton, Ohio.
Hello, Tom.
Hi.
Hey, I agree. This is why I called, was because what the lady just said right here about it is a revenue, and it's a revenue problem because, I made $11 an hour 35 years ago. People are working for that kind of money now. This is what your free trade agreements have done to America, mister. I heard Mr. Bill Clinton on TV the other day. He was asked a question about free trade and how it's helped America. His comment was, it's helped millions of people across the world, not America. It is a revenue problem because you got people out there making $10 an hour, and they're paying the medical, they're paying the insurance. I never had to do that 30 years ago. I told 99% go to these CEOs that have moved our plants out of the country, go to their house, and shove them son of a bitches.
All right, Tom, hold on here. Let's get a response from the congressman.
Well, obviously, we have a different point of view. Look, I don't think you can escape the world. I don't think you can isolate America diplomatically, militarily, or economically. The world changes. Other people are smart, work hard, and are trying to have a better life for themselves as well. And you're either going to compete with them or they're going to pass you by. A place like Oklahoma is a long way from the coast, and you think, well, gosh, what's free trade got to do in Oklahoma? 80% of the wheat we grow in Oklahoma, we export beyond the borders of the United States. We have a big stake in international trade. We build all kinds of drilling equipment and oil exploration things. We export that well beyond the borders of the United States. I think that we are intertwined inevitably in the global economy. Are there some challenges? Absolutely. But I would actually argue we've been slow to embrace that. Look, President Clinton and I probably disagree on a lot of things politically. He was one of the great free traders of all time, and he argued that a lot of the prosperity of the 90s, which everybody remembers back very fondly, had to do with the adoption of free trade policies, which he led the way on, with Republican support. This president, by the way, again, who I disagree with, made exactly the same judgment in approving the 3 free trade agreements this year. So, again, my experience in the economy and everything else is you either compete, but you can't protect yourself from competition long term. Other people will build your products. Other people will go into marketplaces if you let them go by. So, we saw that, frankly, in the American auto industry. I think its failure to adopt, to compete, particularly with relatively low-priced Japanese cars 3 decades ago, are one of the root problems now, and they're changing now. And I think that's an industry that's got a real future, but it would tell you it was slow to recognize international competitive realities.
Let me get Greg in here. He's a Democrat in Garfield Heights, Ohio. Go ahead.
Yes, Representative Tom Cole. I want to talk about the fair tax, and we're dickering around with this payroll tax. Let's eliminate the income tax altogether and go to the fair tax, which is a consumption-based tax that is progressive because it gives a rebate to people up to their poverty levels, and it would eliminate all this nonsense that we go through every year. How do you feel, sir, about the fair tax, and why hasn't it come up for debate in the Congress and in the Senate?
Actually, I've given it a pretty hard look personally, and I certainly prefer anything to our current tax code. I think most Americans feel that way. On the upside, you're exactly right about some of the advantages of it. As a consumption tax, it doesn't hit investment, doesn't hit income. Everybody pays it, brings the underground economy, and even people that try to evade taxes wouldn't be able to evade it, at least theoretically. And it's so there's a lot of merit. And plus, when you're in a trading situation, you literally can drop the tax off. It's not baked into the product. Makes American goods in international markets a little bit more competitive. The downside is this: we got to start all over. That's one thing. But the problem with the fair tax, I would argue, number one, it comes in at 23%, and that's on everything. That would be on houses. Do you really, what's that going to do? Number two, we have a lot of studies that suggest once sales tax get above about 10%, you have a real black market problem that develops. And number three, while there are exemptions and protections up to the poverty wage and even in some fair tax schemes well belong, it is, theoretically a regressive tax. So if you're making if you're Warren Buffett and you're getting most of your income through capital gains and dividends, it's a great deal for you. You can't possibly consume that much. So I think it's a debate we ought to have. Now, in terms of it not moving through the Congress, when we had a Democratic Congress, honestly, there's almost no Democrats that support the fair tax. And you couldn't get it through the United States Senate today. But Dave Camp, who's, again, the chairman of Ways and Means, actually is holding hearings. There's a guy named Rob Woodall from Georgia who's sort of the successor to John Linder from Georgia, who was the father of the fair tax in a political sense. They're working very hard. There's over 80-odd co-sponsors on that legislation. So I actually think it's going to get a serious look in the next few years.
Tamba, Republican in Pacifica, California. An early morning to you. Go ahead.
Yes, hi. How are you doing today?
Hi.
My question is, well, first I got a comment. I'm pretty much disgusted and even embarrassed to sit there and state that I'm a Republican. I'm appalled at the actions that is going on. I've worked for companies and individuals that make high-paying salary that have loopholes to where they do not pay their taxes, such as writing off their second homes because they have an office in there. They create offices outside of their actual corporate office.
Tamba, we're running out of time. I need you to get to your question.
My question being is that you say that I want a handout. I'm selling off all my belongings. I think that we should go and end up having to go and pay for homeless shelters nowadays. And I want to know what he and Congress is going to do to keep my vote as a Republican.
First of all, I invite you to look at the Ryan budget, which actually does away with a lot of these things. What Paul has tried to do is move us toward a tax system that is fairer and flatter without all the built-in loopholes, credits, and what have you. Lowers the overall tax rate, and the idea is investment would then move to where it ought to move rationally to create wealth as opposed to just get out of paying taxes. I think there's general consensus on that in our conference, and I actually think that's an area of bipartisan agreement, potentially. Republicans, put revenue on the table, both in the August discussions with the president over the debt ceiling, and then later during the super committee, and doing exactly those kinds of things. I would expect next year you'll see out of the Ways and Means Committee, again, Dave Camp's committee, a major effort at tax reform. We haven't done that since 1986. It needs to be done again. To your point about homes, I would invite you to look at, Tom Coburn has an interesting set of proposals called Back to the Black, which cuts $9 trillion out of government spending over about a decade. One of the proposals in there is to eliminate deductions for second home, cap first mortgage is at $600,000, $700,000. I don't remember the precise number. But I agree, and that would save, by the way, $187 billion over 10 years. There's no particular reason why people ought to be getting deductions on second and third homes, let alone fly-by-night sort of make deductions like the caller mentioned.
One last question for you here on 2012 politics, and it comes from a tweet who calls himself The Real D-Nice. He says, which Republican candidate do you support and why? I didn't support anybody. I'm actually neutral in the race. I tell all the politicians I know, look, do you really want to be endorsed by anybody that's a member of Congress right now, given their 9% approval rating? I don't think people are going to listen very much to that, nor should they. We've had more debates than we've ever had. There's quite a wide variety of candidates. I think it's going to be a roller coaster ride, and I think it's going to go on for a while. I don't think anybody's going to knock one another out. So I advise everybody just to keep it on. No, any concerns with the former Speaker Newt Gingrich? Some of your colleagues have expressed concerns with his leadership. Oh gosh, everybody will have concerns over everybody, and by the time they get through the general election, I promise you that the Democrats will go after whoever we have and find some incredible character flaw and pound away. It's going to be a pretty tough negative election because I don't think the president can run for re-election on his record and win. He's going to have to disqualify the opposition. That's why we get a lot of the anti-Congress rhetoric, even while he deals with us at one level. So I expect a very difficult campaign, but I think actually a long primary fight is going to let Republicans sort out who's the strongest person for that. We'll end up with a good nominee, and we're going to have a great debate in the fall of next year. As a former chairman of the National Republican Congressional Committee, how's it looking for 2012 and Republican seats in the House? I actually think very good. Look, presidents running for re-election very seldom change control in chambers. Even Ronald Reagan won 49 states, only picked up 14 seats. So I think the congressional majority we have is going to stay there. This is a very good class in terms of being able to hold on to their seats. I think Republican enthusiasm's high, and we've got some opportunities with Democratic retirements. Will you pick up seats? I think it's too early to tell, but I think we'll retain the majority, and we certainly have the possibility of picking up seats. But we also performed pretty high last time, so we obviously won some territory. It's going to be tough to hold, and you've got redistricting as well. So, who wins and loses in terms of numbers, I think is hard to tell today. Who retains the majority and who doesn't, I think is very easy to tell. I think Republicans will be in control of the House next year. Congressman Tom Cole, thanks for talking to our viewers. Thank you. We'll continue this conversation.